A key element in finding solutions for humankind is to cooperate and to have collaborative work across national boundaries and across the North and the global South, so that we find common language, common analysis and a common agreement on where the solutions could be. When we engage in transformative research, which means engaging with policymakers in the policy process, then it is absolutely crucial to have a clarity of roles between researchers and policymakers. Researchers cannot preempt the political decision, and political decision makers have to rely on researchers using sound methodology and sound methods in their research.
We have to recognize that global development is a global imperative. It's an imperative very important for the countries of the North, the developed North and the developing South. Now, if we recognize this, then we have to find shared solutions. It is a search for common solutions, but it has to be based on mutual benefit and a win-win situation. So the countries of the North and the South should be acceptable of the solutions that are being sought. The countries of the developing world should not feel that anything is being imposed on them, or that the solutions being imposed, the policy advice being given, does not match or figure in with their own individual assessments of their requirements, their needs and so on.
I think especially co-produced knowledge is important, transdisciplinary, transnational knowledge, co-created with partners from the Global South and the Global North on eye level, and transdisciplinary in the sense not only transdisciplinary among science, but also including multi-actors, civil society, science, policy and economy, for having legitimated or producing legitimated knowledge.
Needs to be a much more inclusive, collaborative process. So policymakers and researchers need to be collaborating together throughout the whole research process. So researchers should be researching the problems which policymakers are worried about and collaborating together to do the research. Words I used earlier on yesterday about co-analysis of the results and co-production of the recommendations, and that way it's much more likely that the evidence will be useful, that the evidence will be used, and that decisions will be taken and acted on afterwards. So I think we need to break down this idea that research and policy are two separate processes and recognise it as a inclusive, collaborative process involving all researchers, policymakers and the people whom the policies affect.
Now for policy advice to work, it obviously requires a strong interaction between scientists or researchers and policymakers. And so that scientists also support policymakers in asking more precise questions on what kind of problem they want to tackle, and to better understand the problem they are faced with.
If we look, for example, at the recent climate package by the German government, we see that there have been many facts provided by science on climate change which cannot be denied anymore, but still the political actions that they propose are far from enough, which is an illustration for policy not necessarily being based on facts. And that's why I think that we really need to invest much more research and also empirical research on the policy processes as such, looking into who takes decisions based on which values, based on which interests, and how they are weighed off against each other. And then also looking at which role science plays in this process, but not forgetting that policy essentially is political.
Personally, I think what is important to remember that most of all I'm a researcher. I'm not a social activist. So this means my role is to inform and advise policymakers, but not ultimately to influence the policies to my personal liking. So how does this translate into policy advice? For me personally, I would suggest that it is about devising different policy options and analyzing the pros and cons of different policy options instead of providing this specific single policy recommendation.